Good morning. It's a great day to be part of the tolling industry. I'm Bill Kramer, the Communications Director at IBTTA. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Express Lanes Implementations, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. We have a big crowd here today. We have more than 300 people registered for the webinar. If you like multitasking, you can join the live conversation during this webinar on Twitter. Just use our hashtag IBTTA. Before we start, I want to share with you a few meetings that are coming up for the rest of the year in 2016. First of all, I want to point out it's not too late to register for our meeting starting this Sunday here in Washington, D.C., our Transportation Policy and Finance Summit. It's an excellent meeting with great content, and we have nearly 200 people already registered. So particularly if you are in the area, the Virginia, Maryland surrounding areas, I encourage you to take a serious look at that agenda and register, and look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Following that meeting, we have our Maintenance and Road Workshop meeting in Newport, Rhode Island on May 15th to the 17th. Our meeting in Boston this summer, July 24th to the 26th, is our Summit on All Electronic Tolling, Managed Lanes, and Interoperability. And our annual meeting this year will be in Denver, Colorado, September 11th to the 14th. As you can see on your slide, we're still accepting call for presentations, so you have until this coming Sunday to submit those presentations. And to round out our year, we will have a global summit in Mexico coming up in October. So you can still, we're still accepting presentations as well for that. So hope you will all see you at those meetings. In addition, we have a number of webinars coming up this year. There will be more lessons learned based topics such as today's. In early June, we will have Violator and Violations, the Eternal Problem of Toll Roads. Here we will have industry experts share with you what they've seen in regards to curbing violators and violations, and what has worked and what has not worked. As we develop each webinar and set dates, we will keep you informed. Now just a few housekeeping notes before we start. If you are seeking professional development hours for today's webinar, IBTTA is not able to give you credit, but we are happy to give you a certificate for attending the seminar, and then it's up to you to submit that to obtain individual credit. If you would like to receive a certificate from IBTTA, please email Kathleen Davis at kdavis@ibtta.org. During this webinar, we encourage you to submit questions throughout the webinar using the QA pod, which you will see to the right of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And we ask that if you have a question for a specific panelist or wish all panelists to address that question, please note that in your question. And just so you know, you will only see the question that you are submitting. Any of the files that you see here today in the Files pod, also located on the right, are available for you to download, including today's presentations. The webinar will last 1 hour. We will post the slides and the audio portion of this webinar on our website by the end of today. If there are questions that you have posted that we do not get to within the hour, we will get the answers and post them online on our website as well. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Doug Chastain. Doug has been in and around the tolling industry for over 12 years and currently serves as Vice President, Sales and Operations for the Western Region at Xerox. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and an MBA in Operations and Finance. He is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas. Doug is also a project management professional, ISO 91000 auditor, and a graduate of IBTTA's Leadership Academy. He recently helped lead the installation for the $2.5 billion LBJ NTE Express Lanes project in North Texas, and he brings real-world tolling experience to all his projects. Doug, you have the floor. Please remember to take yourself off mute.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you everybody for joining today. As webinar chair this year, I'm really trying to focus our attention on these webinars to lessons learned type of environments. So that's what we're starting off today. And Nick and Julia and John really stepped up to the plate to help me out here. So once again, thanks for the guys for chipping in here. So today you're going to hear from expert speakers who will share their knowledge of express lanes and the implementation of express lanes. And second here. And as more and more tolling agencies consider and implement express lanes, this session will help educate and stimulate your thinking and planning as we discuss barrier versus non-barrier implementation, the pros and cons of public outreach, zone versus single point tolling, also violators versus customer approach, and general lessons learned. I have asked our presenters to be kind of open and frank and direct, more geared toward the lessons learned type of environment. So I hope you get that out of this message today. So with that said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Nick Barr. Nick Barr is Vice President Operations with Transurban in Alexandria, Virginia. Nick is responsible for the management of the 495 and 95 Express Lanes projects in Northern Virginia. Nick has been with the North American business for 5 years, and during this time he has led development of Transurban's managed lanes, capabilities across operations and maintenance, dynamic pricing, tolling, customer management, and enforcement. Prior to joining the North American business, Nick worked with the Transurban Australia, managing the Eastern Distributor Motorway in Sydney for 4 years. Nick also joined the IBTTA Board of Directors in January 2016. Nick, with that, I'll open it up to you, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Doug. Good morning, everyone. Today, as Doug touched on, I'm going to talk about Transurban's 2 operating assets in Northern Virginia, the 495 and 95 Express Lanes. And I guess you would assume that 2 operating assets, you can see them on the map, that were delivered by the same design build firm. They're regulated under a similar concession agreement by the same DOT. They actually connect and intersect, and they're owned and operated by the same concessionaire, being Transurban. You would assume they'd have a lot of similarities, which is certainly true, but there are also many contrasts which emphasize the complexity of managed lanes projects. So talking just to some of the differences between the 2 projects to give you some orientation, the 495 Express Lanes opened in late 2012, so it's been open for a bit over 3 years. They're approximately 10 miles with 2 lanes in each direction on the Virginia side of the Capital Beltway. They're separated from the general purpose lanes by plastic channelizing posts or bollards, and the lanes fall entirely within Fairfax County. They transition to or from the general purpose lanes, which are operated by VDOT at either end, and there's a broad shoulder, numerous cutovers, but a relatively low HOV penetration rate. The 95 lanes opened a bit over a year ago, and they were actually a conversion from an HOV to an HOT facility with a 9-mile extension and a 3rd lane widening in the northern section. 95 is a much longer facility, about 3 times the length, with full Jersey barrier separation from the general purpose lanes. 95 is fully reversible, so heading into DC and the Pentagon in the morning and out in the afternoon, and we reverse the facility twice per day. The lanes traverse 3 counties and transition into the VDOT-operated HOV3 facility up 395. The shoulder width is far more narrow, and the HOV penetration rates reach a far higher level than 495 as compared to 95. So I guess the question is, what does all this mean for traffic management and incident response? So keeping in mind that traffic volumes are about the same on both facilities, but the bi-directional nature of 495 means that we can meet the 10-minute incident response KPI with 2 incident response crews, while on 95, with the exact same contractual KPI, it takes 5 crews. The cutovers on the 495 express lanes enable our crews to quickly move north to south as necessary, enabling us to operate more efficiently and effectively, essentially with a lower volume of incident response crews. In contrast, the single direction of 95 at any given time of the day means that if we don't have sufficient upstream incident response crews at the ready, the nearest downstream crew will need to exit the express lanes, enter the counter-directional and probably congested GP lanes to loop back to the incident, which is obviously hugely inefficient, time-consuming, and costly. The other thing to keep in mind is revenue during the peak periods on express lanes contribute a far higher proportion of revenue than traditional toll roads during the peak. So essentially, peaks are more important on express lanes projects. It's vitally important to get incident response coverage correct, to keep traffic moving after an incident and ensure that revenue keeps on flowing. The type of GP Express separation can also influence facility performance. You can see the contrast in the photos above, 495 on the top left and 95 on the bottom left-hand side. So the 495 lanes, as you can see, they're separated from the GP lanes with a 4-foot buffer and plastic channelizing posts. The implementation of the solution, it's been relatively successful over the first 3 years, and motorist compliance has been strong. But this outcome was not a fluke, and significant planning and coordination went into place prior to commencement of operations. We drove implementation of supporting legislation to penalise crossing the barrier through the Virginia legislature. We built a very close relationship with the Virginia State Police to enforce individuals crossing the barrier, and we constructed strong relationships with first responders and law enforcement as well around the product design, selection and implementation so they could operate effectively during emergencies. And essentially I'm sure everyone's seen them, they're flexible channelizing posts so they can be driven over at a slower speed without any real issues. The 95 reversible lanes, in contrast, are fully separable from the GP lanes by barrier or guardrail. This certainly brings its own challenges with a lack of cutovers, as I touched on, but we seek to mitigate those challenges with tailored operational responses such as contraflow travel. The key challenge with the channelizing posts on 495 certainly remains collisions originating in the general purpose lanes and travelling through the buffer and sweeping into the express lanes. Our concession agreement with VDOT requires us to respond and clear incidents of that nature, regardless of where the incident originated. And you can see from the graph, typically between 40, 50, 60% of accidents on the 495 lanes originate from the general purpose lanes. And this creates a huge operational challenge in influencing road safety initiatives outside of our right-of-way, maximising lane availability and ultimately revenue performance. It highlights the need for close coordination with our regulator, or DOT being VDOT, the need for prompt police and incident response to maintain throughput, revenue, particularly during peak periods, and that's both on the express lanes and the general purpose lanes. And this challenge is essentially non-existent on our Jersey separated 95 express lanes. A key feature of the 95 facility is the use of gates to enable the reversible facility, and we reverse the lanes twice per day, as I mentioned, and that's 24 gate sets, including the operation of the VDOT operated facility up 395. So it's a single entity reversing the lanes across probably a 40-mile distance, and the reversal typically takes about 1.5 hours per day. The priority for us remains customer safety, maximising lane availability, and maximising revenue by delivering an efficient and safe reversal. So they're kind of key themes and trends that flow right throughout our operation. When we inherited or took over the gate operation from VDOT, historical data indicated real problems with motorists colliding with the gate arms, on average about 700 gate hits per annum or multiple gate hits per day, which obviously compromise the objectives I talked about: safety, lane availability, traffic flow and revenue. In February 2015, we worked closely with VDOT to engage a road safety auditor and federal highways to identify opportunities for safety enhancements. By July, August type period, we'd rolled out a suite of safety pilots, including reflective flags, larger lens sizes on the gate arms. We switched to brighter bulbs to enhance gate visibility. We implemented a gate arm length audit and made a few changes in that regard, and rolled out additional pavement markings and better use of DMS to support communication to our customers. Since July, August, you can see from that little graph, even if you can't see the detail, that we've seen a material reduction in gate arm hits from that 50 to 100, probably averaging about 70 gate hits per month, down to 10 or 20 in November, December, and January. And this program's enabled us to improve customer safety, number one, increase lane availability, reduce incident response times, reduce repair and replacement costs, and supported an increase to our toll revenue. The 495 express lanes are located wholly within Fairfax County. It enables a lean, simple, coordinated communication with our law enforcement and first responder partners. The 95 project has added another layer of complexity, and you can see the difference between the number of agencies we've got to deal with one jurisdiction versus 3 jurisdictions on 95. And we're actually in the process of actively negotiating, taking over the 395 lanes from VDOT, and that 95 extension will incorporate jurisdictions such as City of Alexandria Fire and Rescue Police, Arlington County Fire and Rescue and Police, Pentagon Police, National Parks Police, and DC Police, in addition to the existing agencies. So you can imagine what a coordination effort that is, and it's a critical one to get right. So some of the key lessons I would point to include ensuring that law enforcement and first responders have a clear understanding of the concession obligations. They're lanes within lanes, and particularly a transition from HOV to HOT, it's sometimes hard to get that message to permeate through the law enforcement and first responder community, and the phone call still today often goes to VDOT as opposed to the concessionaire. Holding multi-agency desktop exercises to flesh out any conflicts and confusion, particularly around responsibility and coordination at county borders, and ensuring the nuances with each agency's dispatch are clearly understood by our control room operations team. Both our express lanes facilities are HOV3 facilities, and motorists are required to nominate occupancy with an Easy Pass Flex transponder. We engage a dedicated team of Virginia State Police to patrol and enforce the HOV3 requirement, and they have equipment within their vehicles and at the gantry to alert them to motorists who are claiming HOV3. A few lessons around enforcement. The enforcement bays are critical, and you can see the contrast between 495, where we've got a lot more real estate, and you can see a nice, comfortable, safe enforcement bay, which also improves the effectiveness of HOV enforcement, as compared to the narrow shoulder where we widened within an existing footprint on 95. And anecdotally from the state police, enforcement's a lot more difficult on the 95 facility. I guess it's an obvious one, but engaging VSP for HOV enforcement is most effective where HOV rates are high. So on 95, our HOV penetration rate is about 10% of traffic, and on 95, that can get up to 40% of traffic, so a real distinction there. And the right technologies certainly make all the difference to ensure cheaters are caught in vehicle, on gantry alerts, or the emergence of vehicle occupancy detection. Just to wrap up, I'll touch on some terminus complexities. The transition from express lanes to GP or GP to express, it's a critically important area of focus, particularly during opening. And we experience different challenges at both ends of both facilities, depending on what that transition is and what traffic flow is like at either end. These transitions bring significant risk to customer safety, confusion, media and elected official attention, and ultimately revenue. One example of a transition complexity that I'll walk through is our 495 entry point from GP to express. You can see on the photos above, the two left-hand lanes are the express lanes, the right-hand lanes being the general purpose lanes, and this is just approaching the split. We certainly experienced unsafe driver behaviour at opening, with vehicles stopping, reversing and swerving between the two lanes. This is in the first couple of days of operation, and you can see the vehicle in the top photo that's stopped on the 4-foot buffer. Very dangerous behaviour. So some of the lessons in this specific example: customer education is certainly paramount. We found layering a new road configuration on top of the additional complexity of managed lanes or express lanes with new tolling, dynamic prices, a new transponder, new rules, and customers who sometimes expected toll booths is hugely challenging for customers. That leads into on-road communication, which is a very important tool. We utilize EasyPass logos and flashing beacons to alert drivers of the upcoming decision point. A close relationship between the concessionaire and the DOT certainly enables quick changes to be made if necessary. And VDOT were the perfect partner in this regard, responsive, agile and nimble. Innovative and tailored approaches should certainly be considered, and we implemented recently with VDOT and Federal Highways a purple line marking pilot at this location, which has been successful in alerting motorists that there's an upcoming toll facility. Purple's the colour that's associated with EasyPass for those not in the EasyPass network. And close coordination with law enforcement always remains vital to act as a visual deterrence to unsafe driving. Doug, that brings my presentation to a conclusion, and I hope it's been informative.
Thanks, Nick. I think it's really interesting to me that two express lanes in the same vicinity that actually connect to each other can be so different operationally. With that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our second speaker today, Julia Manzo. Julia Manzo is Vice President, Toll Operations with Centra in Austin, Texas. Julia has more than 25 years of local and international expertise in mega AET projects, PPPs, and transport, acting as both a senior and board-level executive as CEO, COO, CIO, and Business Development Director. He became CEO of Combatech Traffic Systems, now CAPS, in Latin America in the mid-90s. Since then, he has been a strong advocate of interoperability, both in Latin America, Europe, and the USA. Julia joined the ACS Dragados Group in early 2000, taking the role of COO for several companies within ACS, including the company set to operate the AET network in Santiago, Chile, and the toll operations leadership of their projects in North America since 2006. Currently, he is Vice President at Centra US, in charge of all toll technology and operations across the 7 highways Centra is currently developing and operating in the U.S. With that said, Julia, it's your floor. Take your phone off mute, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Zach, for your kind introduction, and IBTTA for inviting me to participate in the webinar. 10 minutes is not much, but I'll try to give the audience a 10,000-foot view of several of the issues that we have learned in those 7 years. We were awarded the first project 2009, and up to now we have been in operation in Dallas for almost 2 years. And all that from a triple perspective: the public interest, which fortunately is where most of the good things are happening, and the engineering and the operational perspective, which is where some of the bad and the ugly things can be found on that type of projects. So in the picture you see in the slide, you see the 4 projects I was early on referring. On the left picture you see in orange the LBJ project, right-hand side on the top. Then on the left side of the picture you see in yellow the NT project, which goes across the I-20. And then on the north-south link 35W you see on green NT 35W. Those 3 projects, as you see, they're in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. And on the right-hand side picture, you see northern access to the city of Charlotte in North Carolina, which is the 77 project. At the bottom of the slide, you see some of the main characteristics of those projects, and I guess that you will all agree that once we have seen that all those projects work on congestion pricing mode, so in a way in which the price is directly related to congestion, many of the other characteristics are clearly different. I mean, in the Dallas-Fort Worth region, the express lanes are barrier grade separated. In the LBJ project, the express lanes are initially elevated, then they go underground, and they finally go to grade level with the general purpose lanes. While on the 77 projects, that's going to be much closer to what Nick was explaining before. The express lanes are candlestick separated to the general purpose lanes. The length of 77 is almost twice the length of those corridors in Dallas. Some more lanes per direction in Dallas than the ones we're going to have on the 77. Many more segments on the 77 that we have in Dallas. On 77, we're going to be invoicing based on trip and using or dividing the 27 miles in 7 segments. In Dallas, it's all segment 2 and based on 2 or 3 segments max. And finally, the discount of the high occupancy, it's very different. In 77, they go for free, 100% discount, and on Dallas, they go only with 50% discount. So all in all, quite different projects, but I think that they share the same characteristic of being or requiring a total reconstruction of the whole corridor, which makes construction challenges which are far much higher than if we're talking about the conversion HOB or to HOT. In that case, much of the challenges are in the construction site during the first 2 or 3 years of construction, and I will review those. Before getting into a different perspective, I would like to refer as well to why do you usually say that those projects are different. Basically because this is a controversial topic, and we all know that. Since 2001, the Washington Post coined the term Lexus lanes. A lot of controversy has been around those projects. The construction in a highly congested corridor, which has lots of utilities, which requires maintenance of traffic, which involves lots of detours, and finally rental charges, and finally at the same time that you have to maintain the existing ITS, makes construction certainly challenging. And finally, being required to change fees every 5 minutes requires integration between ITS and tolling, which is far much more than what we're really used on conventional open road toll projects. So all in all, tricky projects in a tricky environment. Then coming on into the presentation, the public interest. Well, we usually when we discuss about the public interest of those projects, we divide that perspective into 3 topics. The growth that we may expect along the corridor, the usage that we may expect on the tolling lanes in the middle of the corridor, and finally, what's the perception of equity. And in that case, we're happy to see that all the KPIs on those 3 topics seem to be moving on the right direction. The corridors are growing at a very high rate. The NTA corridor is growing at a rate of more than 5% year to year. The managed lanes are growing in usage quarter to quarter. You see here on the NTA at 4%. And finally, all that results in an increased perception of equity and fairness, which is directly related to the fact that the congestion on the general purpose lanes has been reduced by 80%. So all in all, I would say that we seem to have a very nice story to talk about, to discuss about those projects when it comes to the public interest perspective. If we move on to the engineering perspective, the situation changes. Those are high demanding projects from a construction perspective. We don't have to forget that if we add ground boxes, splicing boxes, conduits, foundations, etc., I mean all the items that are related to either tolling or ITS, we have an average of 100 items to be placed to be tested per lane. So we're talking about the fact that the project 20, 30 miles may easily have more than 2,000 items to be located. In a project in which does not have space available, all space is taken to the inch, and it doesn't have time. So all in that, what it makes is that the coordination in between the construction site and the system integrator needs to be maximum. The sooner the system integration is on board, the better. The sooner the system integration is connected, or even better, includes the ITS designer into his consortium, the better, because the coordination between those 2 sites becomes very tricky during the 3 or 4 years of the construction. So that could be the first thing to note when it comes to engineering side. Another topic which could be worth to discuss about engineering is the signaling. There was a long discussion about how that signaling, or I could say more than how, what those signals should show. I mean, if you see here, what we have on the screen is the sign-off that you're using in the IBTTA project, and you see that we're only showing price per the standard vehicle, light vehicle, and the HUV vehicle to the nearest exit. So we're not showing incidental charges. We're not showing any other category. We're not showing trips. We're not showing anything of that. We're just showing things which could be very easily understood by the driver, and among all, which could be clearly aligned and connected to the rest of the network. So signaling, it's one of the issues that I think that all public agencies in the area put a lot of resources and time, and I think at the very end it became very successful. But know that that's one of the biggest things into the project. When it comes to the third of the perspective, the operationals, I would say that mainly the customer is what we should be more focused. Nick was talking about the fact that those projects are heavy tilted to a revenue which is located into the certain parts of the day, and it's clear. I mean, the usage patterns on the type of highways are clearly different than conventional tolling, and that has a direct translation into tag video penetration or the reaction of drivers to higher toll rates. So the way the customer responds, the way the customer understands that type of things in those tolls, we feel that's significantly different to what you could see in other type of highways. Outreach, and in here, I think that the suggestion, the recommendation could be very easy to do. Make it simple. I mean, we have been on those projects for many years, so for us probably we're biased. But for the usual driver, if you see down at the bottom some of the comments that we got from our usual customers, that sounds way too complicated. Or this is too complicated for me. Or why should I pay more to sit there longer? I mean, the logic, the rationale behind the business is not that easy. And the outreach becomes something critical into the project development. Usability, that's another issue. I mean, trust is a precious asset. And on that type of highways, losing trust is very, very easy. I mean, you need to consider that rates are changing almost every 5 minutes. And the moment in which the driver sees the fee, it's different to the moment in which that fee will be charged at the tolling gantry. And obviously, is far away to the moment that guy will see the fee that was charged in the statement that's sent once a month. So we need to be prepared to be challenged, and we should offer things as the check pass rate functionality that are used by the customer in order to know 2 months after which was the price that was shown on the panel at the time that he used the highway. On the right-hand side, you see one of the screens that you could check on our websites where the driver may check the price that was charged at any given moment in the past in order to challenge us or to check what the statement is saying. So usability becomes something critical. Understanding the customer is also another important thing. Get to the communication channels, get to social media to better understand what are the drivers. And finally, I'd like to finalize in the benefit of time, not probably too much talking about the interrelation to the toll service provider, but talking about the enforcement side of the picture, which at the end of the day is what we make our living off. And in that particular issue, when it comes to the enforcement, I think that's very important to assume that we have never been so happy seeing cars stationed on the car shoulder. That is something that we like to have. And instead of that, where there's an increased capability of the technology features to detect occupancy at the lane, and then combining this occupancy at the lane with an offsite and later enforcement of that data that has been provided automatically from the lane. So in that particular feature, we should be very close to, we should be very very happy to see those cars removed from the lane, and to have them combined with an automatic enforcement, which we think that currently it's up and running, and we really think that that's an option that we're going to be very, very close seeing our highways. So that's about all. As I said before, I think that there are many taking issues when it comes to engineering side and to the operational side and type of projects. Fortunately, the public interest seems to be reinforcing the viability of that type of projects. But once again, engineering side is what we should be taking care of. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. I especially like how you got the buy-in from the local mayor. I think that would definitely help in the public outreach program for sure. With that, I would like to introduce our final speaker, John O'Neill. John O'Neill III is the Acting Chief of Operations with the Maryland Transportation Authority in Baltimore, Maryland. John started with the Maryland Transportation Authority in 2006. John is responsible for managing the operations of the MDTA's 8 toll facilities, providing direction to Easy Pass operations, facilities management, traffic management, and support services. In previous positions, John served as a program manager for MDTA's electronic toll collection, next generation, open road tolling, and related projects. He played a vital role in designing and implementing all-electronic tolling on the Intercounty Connector, Maryland's first all-electronic toll facility, and on the I-95 express toll lanes in Northeast Baltimore. John, you have the floor. Make sure you take yourself off mute, and it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Thank you. Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us today. We'll start with a brief overview of the I-95 Express Toll Lanes project here in Maryland. The I-95 Express Toll Lanes is the second all-electronic toll facility in Maryland. The first AET facility was Maryland 200 in Prince George's County and Montgomery County, with the first phase, which opened in 2011, and final phase opened in late 2014. The I-95 Express Toll Lanes run for 8 miles from the I-95 split to I-95 Route 43 interchange. The managed lanes opened on December 6, 2014 for non-revenue service, and we opened for revenue service 1 week later. The facility was constructed utilizing the existing median on 95, which provided for 2 managed lanes northbound and 2 southbound, along with preserving 4 general purpose lanes in either direction with barrier separation, which were non-tolled. The map shows the location of the express toll lanes, which was historically one of the most congested areas in the Baltimore region. The project was financed and managed by the Maryland Transportation Authority. We also maintain and operate the facility. Our toll integrator, Xerox, manages the toll equipment and the back office operations for our toll collection. Our tolls are collected via Easy Pass transponder or through video tolling. Our video rates are 50% higher than the Easy Pass, posted Easy Pass rate. At current, we're running roughly 92% via Easy Pass and 8% video toll collection transactions. We utilize variable pricing based on the time of day and day of week, including special holiday pricing, which we update annually. We utilize toll rate signs to display the rates for 2-axle vehicles at the entry, prior to the entry points, to allow the customers to make an informed decision on whether to use the managed lanes or to remain on the general purpose lanes. We also utilize a unique tool, a digital video monitoring system, which allows us to independently verify and audit the toll collection being conducted by our toll integrator on the managed lanes. This allows us to go back at any point in time and take a look not only visually, we can also pull up the electronic transaction which corresponds with the video of the actual vehicle going through to ensure proper classification and reporting. Travel times on the ETLs proved to be a challenge.
At the managed lanes, we're only separated, where they are only separated by a shoulder and barrier wall. The bleed over from the Bluetooth devices that we usually use to collect the data for travel times were deemed not to be accurate. So we came up with a solution to place readers at our entry and exit points, and we utilize the transponder reads from the vehicles to actually calculate our travel times for the general purpose and the express toll lanes in real time. The express toll lanes usage, as you can see on slide 37 here, is running well above our initial and revised forecast. It's been very popular with our customers, and there's been many benefits. One of the added benefits for the customers that continue to travel in the general purpose lanes is it has reduced congestion in that area to allow people to make choices during peak periods, which has provided more reliable travel times to our customers. And as an aside, I actually commute using this route every day, and I actually utilize the general purpose lanes, and can tell you over the past year my commute time has decreased and has not only become more reliable but much less frustrating as well. Getting into some of the lessons learned, we'll start off with construction. We were very fortunate that we were able to utilize the same project teams for both construction and toll system implementation that we had utilized to manage the Intercounty Connector project before. This allowed us to bring some of our lessons learned over from the ICC project to the Express Toll Lane project. So I have a minor combined list here. One major item that we learned was to establish a project office for the design phase. Not having an actual project office with implementation and toll integrator participants during the design phase for review proved to be a challenge that prior to construction we had some minor changes to make, which we'll get into a little later. Another is to establish the roles and responsibilities for all the team before the project begins. Actually, during construction, and many of you have run into this issue, you run into issues of who is responsible for which type of work when you're out there with the design builder, your contractors, and your toll integrator. We were able to minimize most of these issues because we established a close working relationship with the toll integrator, the design builder, and also other local agencies, utilities, environmental groups, as well as fire rescue and other first responders. We are fortunate to have our own police force and also a good working relationship with the Maryland State Police. We even conducted some on-site tests and functional exercises prior to opening the roadway to ensure that we were providing proper access and turnaround for these emergency vehicles. As I said previously, we utilized many of our lessons learned from the ICC project. We learned in that project to hold regular meetings with the agency, with the, did everyone else did the slideshow disappear for everyone else? I'm sorry to stop. Oh, thank you. Held regular meetings between our Division of Communications, the design builder, and the toll integrator, as well as the project teams. These meetings started out monthly when we were pre-construction and then became weekly during construction and implementation. This actually had an added benefit of allowing information to be disseminated to the public rather quickly due to our involvement of the Division of Communications. Another lesson learned is on the ICC, we had that digital video monitoring system. We placed the cameras downstream. We learned that on the ICC, after hours, that we had blooming issue with headlights coming at our cameras. So on the ETLs, we managed to place those upstream and did not experience the same issue. Toll integrator, another lessons learned, the toll integrator should assign dedicated resources to the design phase. And to review design, we did run into an issue with conduit sizes pre-construction, which required some changes just prior to construction but post-design. We performed, when we get into variable pricing, we also performed a detailed analysis of dynamic pricing and determined that with one tolling zone in either direction, and based on our historical data, we had pretty well-defined peak, off-peak, and overnight periods that we could utilize time-of-day pricing, which allows us to, and we have the mechanism in place to modify those periods annually, which we do. Factory acceptance testing for the intercounty connector was performed in pieces. So with the same team, we learned on the express toll lanes that we needed to do complete end-to-end testing. And we went from transaction all the way through the notification process prior to going live, which minimized any systems issues we had. Another great lesson learned was in our maintenance. The preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance needed to be performed by the toll integrator. With only 2 lanes and the need for overhead work, we require full closure of the northbound or southbound ETLs while that work is being completed. Looking back on this design, we probably would have designed with an overhead walking enclosure to allow technicians to perform routine maintenance without the need to do full road closures. We also are in pre-design for entry and exit gates to minimize the need for full maintenance of traffic when we're performing preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance on our gantries. We also prepared a full concept of operations document and had multiple meetings, which was necessary to ensure that we had sufficient staffing, sufficient police coverage for enforcement, and complete exercises and preparations of how we would deal with incidents in that closed roadway. Interesting issues arose just recently. Many of you here in the Northeast know that we received 30-plus inches of snow on a late January blizzard that just passed us by. We had come up with a policy that if we received more than 8 inches of snow, we would close down the express toll lanes to focus our efforts and our equipment and resources on the general purpose lanes to keep them passable. This worked very well. We were able to keep our roads passable during the storm. Cleanup in the express toll lanes, however, did take some time to reopen, but we did determine that we do need to look into, and we are looking into, and they're pre-designed, entry and exit gates such as they have down in 95 on the express lanes, so that we may close those lanes down a bit easier than sending crews out there prior to or during an incident. Okay. The remaining segments for the express toll lanes, the public has responded favorably to the express toll lanes and have been calling for an expansion. Now, the planning study has been completed and a preferred alternative has been selected. However, Section 200 is not funded for design nor construction at this time, and there is no schedule. And with that, good for questions, Bill.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks also to Nick and Julia for their excellent presentations. And now we're going to open it up to a few questions here. We're trying to do this at the same time. So for Julia, you mentioned providing a way for drivers to check the price charged. How soon after the trip may a driver check the fare charged?
Well, to be honest, I don't have the exact answer to that question. If I remember well, it's the day after that the driver may check what the fee that the panels were showing the time that he drove the highway. I think that's done at the day after. But nevertheless, that can be easily seen just by getting into our website. There shouldn't be any technical constraint that doesn't allow us to show that much earlier. But if I remember well, the final conclusion was that it should be shown at the day after.
Okay. Thank you, Julia.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, can you please explain how you perform snow removal on the 495 lanes?
Sure. So responsibility for snow removal sits with VDOT, but it's a huge coordination effort. Basically, they get a bunch of trucks operating in tandem like a flock of ducks to push the snow to either side. The challenge really is the plastic channelizing posts on 495, and we leading that pointed flock is a flusher which shoots out the snow from between the channelizing posts. The reality is there's a fair bit of damage after a major snow event. We're lucky in Northern Virginia we don't get too much, but those posts get pretty beaten around during snow treatment and snow removal, so it's a big replacement effort in the days thereafter.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. One more question for you, Nick. How are the gates reversed, controlled, and monitored? Manually, system, or a combination of the both?
Now, I see there's a few people on the call who could probably answer this question better than me, but it's a combination of both. So we monitor the gates from the traffic control room here in our operations center. We have incident response crews who shadow the reversal to make sure it's done safely and in a timely manner. And if there are any issues at specific gate sets, the crews can operate those gates manually if necessary. Usually it's pretty smooth and all run out of the control room, but when cold weather kicks in or there are maintenance issues, there's certainly a manual component to it as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Julia, another question for you. What percentage of revenue comes from electronic tolling customers, those with transponders, versus invoiced violator customers?
Now it could be around 60-40, 60 tag, 40 video.
Okay. You like those questions, huh? Pretty straightforward. Another question for you, Julia, is what is your opinion of cost benefits of time of day pricing versus dynamic pricing?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that congestion pricing has significant advantages over scheduled pricing, but on the other side of the balance, it clearly has or is much highly demanding from a technical standpoint and operational standpoint. So now the question could be, probably the question should be, does one thing offset the other? And now our answer to that question would be yes, especially when it comes to increasing your capability to address incidents and accidents on the general purpose lane. And that's what we're mainly interested by. I mean, we usually mainly the features of congestion pricing to address incidents and accidents on the general purpose lanes, which is what dramatically affects the traffic on the express lanes. That's what you cannot address with schedule pricing.
Okay, thank you, Julia. John, this question is for you. Have you looked at before and after congestion stats to assess how well express lanes mitigate traffic times?
Yes, we have. We've actually experienced about a 10% reduction in congestion in the area. And the travel times, I don't have the stats in front of me, unfortunately, for the increase in reliability on travel times. But I can get that to whoever's asking the question in short order.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll talk a little bit about the follow-up questions in just a minute, but I have a few more here for Nick and Julia. Julia, what ITS devices are used to monitor, enforce HOV, and what amount of transactions are human automatically validated?
Now, currently, the HOV enforcement is the declaration, whether you are or not HOV, is done automatically. I mean, you have a wide range of services, so you can make the declaration whether you're HOV or not. But I guess that the question refers more not to the declaration but to the enforcement. And the enforcement is done by a traffic officer parked next to the gantry. In the case of Dallas, there's no automatic validation of enforcement. We're currently discussing different options to change that approach in our next project in Charlotte. I think that there the conditions are quite different, the technology is quite different, and in there we're much closer to consider an automatic enforcement technology, which is not the case that we're currently doing in Dallas.
All right, thank you so much. This is another question for you, Nick. Can you comment on percentage of HOT traffic on 495 and 95 that are commuters? Does that affect confusion and our violation rates?
The commuter population is certainly something that we monitor, but there's a huge degree of seasonality on both facilities, particularly on 95 with the through corridor from Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, heading down to Florida. So it certainly changes month to month, but we find that there's not as heavy commuting population as we would have expected. The frequency of customers is probably lower than our initial models, and it's more an option that customers use when there's a real benefit, when they need to get from A to B. So the anecdotal stories we hear about are getting home to go to a kid's sporting event or a kid's concert, or I've got an important business meeting or an interview. So commuter frequency is not as high as I think people would expect.
Thank you, sir. For this question is for Julia. Do all of the signs only display prices to the nearest exit, and has that been accepted by the public?
Well, I would say in general terms, yes to both questions. I would say in general terms, because there are some of the signs which do not clearly show the next exit, but the one that's more representative of the drivers that enter through a particular ramp, which is the case of the one I show you in the presentation. But those are very, very particular cases. In general, what you show is the nearest entrance, and yes, it's been well accepted by the drivers on the area. I would probably say, when it comes to signaling, that the question there is not that much what you show in the signals, but where the signals are placed. And in a corridor in which you have three different segments, express lanes, and then general proposed lanes, and then frontage roads, I mean, we shall not forget that there are areas on the LBJ where we have 23 lanes side by side. So unfortunately, the amount of signs that you have on the road is significant. And it's not that easy for the driver to make sense of all those signs. But unfortunately, we haven't seen any other way to make it simpler. But once again, I think that the simplicity is the cornerstone of this design. But unfortunately, we are aware that this is much complicated than it was before, because there are many more options and many more lanes. But this is what it is.
Thanks, Julia. Well, one last question, and I'll turn it over to Bill to wrap things up. On the bollards, and I'm not for sure who this question is to, so maybe to you, Nick, because on the bollard separated HOV lanes, how often do you have gantries for toll collection or violation enforcement?
On 495, there's a gantry, maybe perhaps every mile. It's not so much linked to the bollards and the separation, more so the entry and exit points, so we can differentiate pricing for customers traveling different OD pairs, different distances. That's the primary driver, and there's an HOV or state police enforcement bay at each one of those locations as well.
Okay. And Bill, are you on? I'll turn it over to you to close up the meeting. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Doug, Nick, Julia and John, you all did an outstanding job, and we had over 200 people on this call and lots of questions coming in. If your question wasn't answered, we're going to try to get each of the presenters today. We're going to share those questions with them after the webinar and get them to do some short answers, and we will post those on our website within 24 hours, along with the audio recording and the presentation of this at the IBTTA website, so please check back in the next couple days for that. We also will be sending out a post-webinar survey. Please respond to that because we like to hear your feedback, and we want to continue to do everything we can to improve our webinar series. Again, thank you for being part of today's webinar. I look forward to seeing you back here on future webinars and seeing you in person at our meetings around the country and in Mexico this coming year. Thank you all, and have a great day.